Hello, my beautiful people. Welcome to the next in the series of the walk through the Major Arcana. I'm here joined with the amazing Heather from Astrology with Heather. I'm hoping that you've subscribed to her channel, but if you haven't already, please go and check her out. She's an amazing astrologer. She has so much knowledge, it's unbelievable, and she's super, super sweet, super, super kind. Thank you for being here. Today, we are going to talk about the High Priestess. This is a card that pretty much grabs people's attention when it shows up, right? So, hi Heather, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Raphael? And thank you so much for doing this with me again. This has been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm learning tons as well, which is great. So thank you for agreeing to be a part of the project. It really means a lot. So yeah, today we're talking about the High Priestess. And so I'm going to jump straight in. Obviously, when you see this card, like a lot of people know this tarot card is quite a popular one. Lots of people have lots of different theories about what it might mean. So I'm going to go straight in. Your High Priestess, things that you would talk about when she shows up are intuition, psychic ability, psychic awareness, psychic phenomena, impressions. When you think about the High Priestess, she doesn't communicate necessarily through words. She will communicate with you through feelings, through intuition, through your gut instinct is another tagline that's really strongly linked to this card. And as you can see there, she's like, I mean, it's totally packed full with symbolism. And that's one of the reasons I love tarot, because there's just so many different layers of meaning in there. So she has two kind of associations. If you were talking about her specific sign, you would be talking about the sign of Cancer. And I'm going to go into that. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because I have moon in Cancer in my chart. So I'm always a bit partial to Cancerian energy. But the other part of this is she actually represents the moon. So when we're talking about things that are intuitive, things that are changeable, impressionable, deeply emotional, does that kind of ties right into the lunar aspect, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got my moon in Cancer too. So
Oh, cool.
we have
I didn't know
we have
that.
that going for us. But yeah, that Cancerian energy, it's very changeable. One of the things that it's pretty common understanding of like Cancer and like planets in Cancer are that like it has to do with this, it has to do with cycles. It has to do with like this energy of changing and constantly repeating things over and over again. And it's that emotional and intuitive energy too. So there's that energy of something that's beneath the surface that's not always necessarily apparent externally, depending on what planet's there. But yeah, the moon, absolutely, it has to do with, obviously, on a physiological level, it has to do with the tides, which are constantly changing and shifting. The moon has different phases, so it's constantly growing and then, depleting. It has to do with the reproductive cycles of animals and even humans, especially women, in our menstruation cycle. And so it's about cycles, right? And it's about repeating cycles. And that's one of the things about the moon that's kind of interesting to me. A lot of people don't realize that the moon can have a negative energy because it has to do with our repeating habits and emotional patterns and things that we do habitually over and over and over again that we might not be conscious or aware of. And I'm wondering if that has anything to do with that priestess energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It's brilliant. There's a few things actually that you mentioned there that I really want to talk about. So you mentioned changeable, right? So we've come from this sort of masculine dominating energy of the magician, right? Who was all about that forward progression, being seen, being at the forefront, being heard, speaking the words, being out there with them. And then we come to the High Priestess. So it's kind of, I mean, if you imagine he's like the masculine energy, the High Priestess would be the feminine energy. She would be the receptive energy. So straight away, I mean, the big thing that we could see in like the symbolism there, you'd be thinking about the sun and the moon, right? Because it kind of gives you that masculine, feminine energy. So your High Priestess is almost like she's like a receptacle for the energy that the magician has already poured out there. He was all about that sort of forward projectile energy, where she's going to take that energy, nurture it, and turn it into something else. So it's amazing that you mentioned, you know, about mothers, about the, you know, the feminine energy, about the lunar energy and stuff, and the transformation, because ultimately what happens when men and women come together, you get children, right? Something else is birthed, something new. And it's interesting that you mentioned this thing about patterns and cycles. She's very much linked to the moon, but she's also linked to water. I love what you mentioned there about the cycles of human beings as well. So I know that when the moon is waxing, our hair grows quicker, right? Is that...
Allegedly, yes. So if you want to like cut your hair to stimulate growth, like you would do it during a waxing moon. If you want a haircut to last, like you want it to stay short, you would do it during a waning moon.
So brilliant. I wish I'd known. So yeah, the other thing with the high priestess as well that you mentioned about the negative aspect, this is really important. And as you can see there, so let's take it right back to that Fool card energy, right? He had his large wand kind of thrown over his shoulder, you know, very sort of haphazardly, not really aware of how much power he had inside of him. The magician took it a step further. His wand was smaller. He was much more in control of it. And because it was white, he's conscious now of that energy. When you see here, the high priestess sits between the two pillars, you've got the light and dark in complete balance there, which means she is that understanding. She is that knowledge of how to blend the physical world, the masculine energy, and the spiritual and the receptive energies, which is, you know, the two pillars there that I'll get into. And you see there now, so the light and dark wands, both in her control. She's totally at peace or at ease. And the interesting thing that you mentioned there about the negative aspect as well is if you look at her, put it that way, and you can see how she's sat in front of the veil.
Okay,
You kind of get the hint that there's something else behind it, but you don't get to see. And then you see how she's got like the book or the Torah just underneath, and it's kind of partially hidden. So you're not really sure what the full word may be on there. And that talks about this energy of hiding things, things not necessarily being overtly concealed. And if you were talking about that, what phase of the moon would you be thinking of?
Probably the new moon, because that's like when you're kind of at that stage where something's about to happen or something's getting started, but you're not fully conscious of it and it hasn't manifested yet. And you might not even be taking action on it, and you shouldn't be if you're if you're like doing electional astrology and, you know, going by the phases of the moon. It's kind of like there's a seed, there's an idea, it's not fully conscious. You can't fully express it yet, but there's something there. Right. And so that would be that new moon energy. And the lunar energy in general, that makes perfect sense, because there are things in our own charts and in our own lives that are a part of us and that are a part of our experience that we're not fully conscious of. And the moon oftentimes represents those things.
Wow. Yeah, brilliant. Taking it back as well, what you mentioned earlier about the Cancerian energy and being linked to motherhood and feminine energy and stuff is really interesting, as I'm sure you've discovered now, because how much knowledge you store in your brain is amazing. In ancient astrology, they said that Cancer was the gate of life, right? This is where the soul kind of enters. And then the gate of death was considered the Capricornian energy, which I find fascinating because we're just about to have the nodal switch now. So it will be interesting to see what comes up with that.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense too, because when you think about like the rulership, I think that probably is the association with the sign rulers, the moon and Saturn. The moon is literally the mother. It represents the mother in the chart, and it describes the mother and the relationship with the mother, and then your own nurturing capabilities in adulthood as well, and how you mother or nurture your children. It doesn't have to be that you're a female and that you're a mother. Even as a man, it could be how you nurture your children and how you display that energy. And that's kind of that thing where like you kind of become your mother, right? Or you become your parents, because your parents are represented by like the sun, the moon, the fourth house, these energies that are part of you too. But then Saturn, you know, traditionally in like Hellenistic astrology and a lot of different traditional forms of astrology before Pluto was discovered, represents death. So you have this energy of life and death, which I would assume would have to do with those rulerships, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's phenomenal. It's really good segue into the next point as well that I wanted to make. The aspects of motherhood and nurturing and all of those things. So when you see the high priestess in a man spread, if you were reading for a man, this would very often represent either his girlfriend, wife, most important woman in his life, or his mother, if he doesn't have either one of those, or maybe he has both, you never know. In a woman spread, this would represent her, but it could also represent her mother. So it's usually the most important woman to you, the one that you would turn to in times of need, the one that you would go to for that comfort, that nurturing, that connection. And as I understand it, the moon in astrology is very much about your comfort, the place that you go to, you know, when the doors are shut and the curtains are closed, so to speak.
Yeah, it's your emotional comfort zones. It's like what feels most comfortable to you. And again, it's those habitual patterns that you go back to, because usually it's the type of nurturing you received in childhood. It's what feels good to you and cozy and safe. And so you'll usually kind of habitually go back to that without even realizing that you're doing it. And yeah, so it's that safe, cozy container. Yeah, I think that's, and that Cancerian energy has to do with that too, right? It has to do with wanting to stick to your emotional comfort zones, being guided by feeling and by intuition, as opposed to being guided so much by like rational, logical, linear thinking. And that's kind of that bridge, right? That bridge between that like mental energy and what's kind of going on unconsciously, subconsciously, interdimensionally. That would be that lunar energy. The moon represents the way that you gather your intuition, and any planet that's in Cancer is going to act more intuitively as opposed to rationally, or even it might not even be very action oriented. It might be more reactionary or more receptive. And so all of those things hold true for Cancer and for the moon.
Yeah, fantastic. It's really funny you mentioned that, because I know today as we're filming this, the moon is in Leo.
Yeah.
And 2 days before, I remember everyone messaging me and they were like, oh, you know, I'm struggling today, or I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that. Lots of people I knew were sort of reaching for the comfort food. And I was like, I got to check, where is the moon right now? And lo and behold, it's in Cancer, right? So everybody's kind of in their feels, and that's a really important point to make. And I love that you bring in the subconscious, because she really is that. And that's exactly how she will communicate with you. The high priestess is not about, so where your magician card, as we talked about, was all about the words and the communication, she's all about the feeling. She's all about the intuition. She's all about the gut instinct, those things that you feel deeply that you might not necessarily be able to put words to. I mean, I've seen her represent things like dreams that clients have had before, things that felt really, really real to them, but they couldn't necessarily put a finger on it. And for that reason, you know, I talked about the hiding things, or this hidden aspect. She can represent anything from a hidden object to a hidden person. Really good, interesting one is if you see your high priestess come up with the Ace of Pentacles or the Ten of Pentacles, you're looking at hidden money.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, right. So she'll kind of allude to whatever she sits next to, much like an astrological transit, you know, it reveals other things. Whatever she's sat next to, she's trying to tell you there's something about this that is either hidden, something that you might not know, or there is another aspect or a depth to it that you don't necessarily have in the conscious sphere. So it's kind of like that hint at something. And, you know, interestingly enough, I don't know if you've seen I think it was The Hobbit, you know, the Lord of the Rings series. There's one scene in particular that as soon as I saw it, I was like, that is a tarot card. It was like the picture of the high priestess, what she looks like, literally. And this woman communicates in those flowy sort of ways, and won't necessarily speak the direct thing, but you get exactly what they're talking about. And that's very much the high priestess. It's those things that are hidden, those whispers that you get, sort of, you know, when the hair stands up on the back of your neck, or somebody says something and you're like, yeah, there was something else underneath. All of those things, that's all very, very high priestess stuff.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. And like I said before, the moon represents sort of how you get your intuition. And so if you kind of look at it's kind of like with the high priestess, what it's paired with, right? So where is the moon in your chart? That shows you, do you get like that hair standing on edge? Is it like a visceral sort of like jolt when you get your intuition? Is it something that comes in like a vision, a dream, a download? Is it a feeling or an emotional response? Like all of these things can be shown by like your moon's placement. It really shows how your intuition is delivered. So like people who have the moon in the fire signs will get that like visceral sort of jolt of like energy. It's like they just know, and it's like, ugh, like really intense.
Wow.
You know, people who have moon in Cancer like us, it's more like a feeling or a sensation, and it's just kind of like it feels right or it feels wrong. It's about feeling. People who have the moon in, let's say, Taurus, which I want to ask you about Taurus with that card in a second, but the moon in Taurus it's exalted in Taurus, right? That's the best placement. And they usually feel it in a tactile way. So their skin will crawl or they'll have some sort of sensation physically. I've even had people, like clients, who have said that when their moon is in Taurus, like with moon in Taurus, that when they receive intuition, like they feel it in their body. Like if something's bad, they'll feel it as pain, or if they are in a bad emotional state, they'll feel pain or like illness in their body. Like it'll transmit in a physical way. But those are also people who know they're grounded in their intuition. They know when it's intuitive versus something else, and they know what to do with it. And so that's why, like the moon exalted in Taurus, your intuition comes through in a way that's very clear, very tangible, very recognizable, but also you usually know what to do with it. And so with that card, like the crown that she's wearing, obviously that has to do with the phases of the moon, like the, you know, waxing, waning, and full moon, but it also looks kind of like Taurus energy, right? It's like those horns. So what would you have to say about that? Like, is there a connection there?
Yeah, for sure. I love that you mentioned that. The moon, as you said, is totally exalted in Taurus. Now, even to take the symbolism even deeper, as you can see, it kind of represents that Taurian sort of
Yeah.
symbol. If you look behind her, the veil behind her has got pomegranates on it.
Oh, like
You know
Persephone.
all, yeah, I was just going to say, you know all about her, because I remember seeing a talk that you did a while back, and you were mentioning Persephone and that whole energy, and it is very much linked to the physical form, to the physical body, but also the earth as well. Like when there are things happening in your environment or around you, she's very much the, and we as well, that whole thing with the pomegranates and the veil there, remember that, because we're going to revisit that in the next card. And
Okay.
that's the really, really interesting part about it, because it totally brings in that symbolism of Venus and Taurus as well. So yes, you can absolutely see that. It's really great that you brought it up as well. Um, yeah, fantastic. Um, so your high priestess, one of the other meanings of it, if you're into Kabbalah, or if anybody knows anything about it, you might know this. She actually sits in the sphere of Da'at, which is effectively a sphere that is there but not there. So all things, and this kind of goes back to this whole Cancer being the gate of life, all things must pass through this sphere, but it's not necessarily one that's there. So there's this idea that there is a great truth, there is an intuitive understanding that we all come to, but the path that we all take to get there is completely different. And that's really kind of what you were talking about there with the different moon signs. If it's in a different element, you will come to that intuitive understanding, but you'll come to it in a different way. And I think by the time we sort of reach, old age, everybody, even, sort of like man builders and, guys that work in the police force and stuff, I've had a lot of them say to me, like, I'm not really a big believer in that stuff, but there was this one time that and you listen to them and you can see that everything about them changes, because there was a deep connection to something that they couldn't explain with science and rationality and all of that stuff. It was, like you said, it was either visceral for them, or it was something that, like, even now I'm actually getting goosebumps just talking about it. So that it's that idea that we are all tapped into something else, but the way that we come to that understanding is going to be deeply subjective to who we are and what our energy is, what our chart looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And like try to explain that to somebody just, off the streets, like they're going to think you're crazy, right? Like, I know because, I felt this feeling and I saw this image and like, it's personal to you. It might mean nothing to anyone else. Like when my husband has like an intuitive hit, the way he explains it to him, I'm like, I don't understand how you came to that, but that's okay. That doesn't make sense to me because we have a different way of, interpreting that information. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And one thing I want to ask you about too, because I was just pondering about like that gateway to life and death and all of that, and that association with the high priestess. When you look at the moon, there are different traditions that look at the moon as sort of like this gateway to reincarnation that keeps us stuck in the reincarnation cycle. And even if you look at like David Icke's work, like he has a whole talk that he did about Saturn and the moon, which are linked, in astrologically and in this way, and how the moon is sort of like very physically like this place where like, different entities force you to reincarnate or something like that. But there are different traditions that talk about this too. I believe the Hermetic tradition has something along those lines. I was just listening to a talk about like the Toltec version of, these astrological types of associations, and they talk about something similar. And so you look at that high priestess, there's like that dark energy, that light energy that it's sitting in between. There's something hidden behind there. Persephone also is associated with reincarnation, death, and rebirth, and you have that pomegranate energy. So would you say that there's an aspect of reincarnation? Like if you pulled that card, could it be like an association with something from a past life that's coming back around?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And very often, the things that she will reveal to you are things that have been hidden in antiquity. So,
Mm.
when I say antiquity, obviously most people would think like distant, distant past or past lives. Sometimes it can be your personal life. So, maybe 10, 15 years in your past. In terms of the way that, time supposedly works, yes, antiquity. Taking it even further, she literally has the ability to delve into all times, all moments, and that whole thing with the pomegranate and the reincarnation, absolutely. And one of the things that I've seen for this card, especially when it comes up with a specific card, it actually has a lot of links to mediums. I've seen a lot of mediums that have had this card, and when it shows up, I'll say to them, and it comes with, and so I'll tell you the association. If you see this card and the death card come up, you're probably reading for somebody that either has mediumistic tendencies or has that energy that surrounds them a lot, right? So when you think of the death card, when you think about past lives, reincarnation, speaking to other spirits, other entities from different places. So yes, very much so, reincarnation, past lives, spirits that are, now disembodied but still present in some way, shape or form. The thing that you were saying about the darkness and the hidden thing as well. Oh gosh, yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you for bringing it up. So I've also heard that as well, that when we go through the process of leaving this life, depending on, the moon is kind of like a thing that will bounce you back if you've not outlived your karma, but if you haven't kind of settled your score, let's say, let's
Yeah.
take it down to a really mundane example. If you haven't kind of cleared your karma, the moon will bounce you back. And I find that a really interesting idea, especially with this idea of being reincarnated, because when you think about the moon, it starts dark and it will grow and it comes full and then it starts to wane and it, disappears again. And that, like you said right at the beginning, is all about cycles and patterns, which I think is a really interesting thought. And the whole thing with the pomegranate is that you live many lives, infinite lives, and through that process, you go from this kind of seedling new moon, grow to your full, and then you kind of wane again to go on to the next cycle. So yeah, really fascinating that you brought that up.
That's so interesting. Yeah, because the moon, like in my perspective on it, has a lot to do with your emotional attachments. It also is highly associated with addictions and addictive repetitive behaviors. So, you know, somebody who has like an obsessive compulsive tendency might have moon in Scorpio in the 8th house, or moon with Pluto or something like that. You know, it's obsessions, compulsions, it's addictions, it's habitual emotional responses to things. But when you think about it, it's also, you know, motherhood and children and childbirth and that type of thing is associated with the moon, and especially Cancer. And, you know, a lot of people believe that children are like this karmic attachment that kind of keep you held to this earth as well. And so, you know, and you can like also kind of live out your destiny through your children, like things that you didn't complete, you know, your child completes it. There's so many different layers to this that you could look into.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, that's a really interesting one as well. There's, I'm sure you've read it, but there's a book called The Celestine Prophecy.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
It's brilliant. It's a fiction book, but if you ever get a couple of days where you think, man, you know, I could read something, really check it out.
Okay.
They really talk about that idea that you will concentrate into your children the things that you couldn't sort of conquer or deal with, right? And once they do it, if they then have children, they'll pass something else on, so that we're kind of constantly going through the lines and getting, you know, not, well, better's not a really great word, but you kind of know what I mean, like almost like refining that, you know, the energy of your lineage, I suppose.
That's interesting too, because a lot of people who have done past life regressions and past life work and things like that, a common theme seems to be that like people will reincarnate like over and over again with their children, and they'll like switch roles. Like you'll be the parent, and then the next time they'll be the parent, and the next time they'll be the parent, and they just keep doing that over and over again. But each time they're like learning something new and correcting for the mistakes of like the last reincarnation. And that seems to be like a pretty common pattern from people I've spoken with who have done, you know, that type of work.
Yeah, yeah, again, brilliant that you brought that up. Very much so. You see a lot of this, and you know, we talk about it here on this plane in this time of like role reversal, and you can see that, right, with friends and family friends and stuff, and you look at them and you're like, which one of you is the parent here? It's not really, you know, it gets a little bit blurred, and I totally believe that. I'm a big believer in reincarnation. I believe that we do come back many times to learn various different things. And I think very often when you look at the relationship that you have to your people, to, you know, to your parents, to your siblings, if you have them, and you see the dynamics there, I don't think it's just the stuff that we have from this life. Sometimes you can see, you know, one person obviously has an idea of how this relationship should be. And when you think about tracing that back to a deeper sort of source, you start to unpick it. I mean, I've definitely had moments where I've looked at both of my parents and figured, right, okay, I think last time this is how it was, just because of the way that it's played out this time round. So a very, very interesting idea for sure. And I think this whole idea that the moon is your cycles and it's your emotional attachments, it very much is that. What is the feeling behind it? And, you know, I'm a big believer in this. If you get a feeling, follow it backward, because that will show you the thought process, or, you know, what it is that you're holding on to that's causing that feeling, you know,
Absolutely.
whether it's good or bad, either way.
Absolutely. And even in like my my grad school classes and things like that, like that's something that you do. Like if you're experiencing negative emotions like anxiety, you follow that thread. Like first off, you kind of contradict it, right? You figure out like, okay, is this actually realistic? There are a lot of techniques that you can do for that, but you want to figure out what the root cause of that is. And then, you know, for the future, like if you're feeling that way and it doesn't make sense to the situation at hand, that there's a different cause to that, and that it's not necessarily related to the here and now. And that helps you to break that cycle. So absolutely. Yeah. What you're telling people to do is like what, you know, some psychologists might tell people to do.
Sweet. Yay. That works for me. I'll take that. I'll take it. Awesome. So the other thing is with your High Priestess card, sometimes she can literally talk about your very own intuition. Sometimes it's like, so if this comes up in a spread, it's like your own intuition is saying to you, I have a message for you. There's something that I want to deliver to you. There's something that I want to share with you. And it may be you know, for a million reasons, busy lifestyle, you know, maybe you haven't had time to really, you know, stop and think about, you know, the messages that have been coming through for you. Sometimes it really is your own intuition, your own intuitive push or pull that's coming through.
Interesting. And one of the things too in that PDF for the course that you're doing, that it mentioned that this is like hidden information that hasn't been revealed yet. And the experience I had recently when I pulled that card that I mentioned to you off camera was that I pulled it. I've just been pulling cards just to kind of see like, how is this going to go? How is that going to go? And then see how it actually goes so I can kind of learn from that. And I pulled the High Priestess for like the energy behind a webinar. And I was like, okay, that's weird. And then literally something very important was revealed to me through a woman actually who is very intuitive. She had like a psychic premonition, and she's a very like nurturing kind of supportive figure in my life as a result of that webinar. And that's not something I would have expected, right? I was like, what is this? But it wasn't
brilliant.
revealed until way later, right? Until after the whole thing played out. Is that like, so how does that work with the tarot card when you pull those cards?
Yeah, very much that. So it's interesting as well, right? We've talked about mothers, motherhood, you know, nurturing, nourishing sort of energy. There you go. Somebody that has all of those attributes has revealed something to you, which is really interesting. So we talked about this idea of hidden things being revealed. Sometimes it's knowledge or information that you haven't come to consciously, or that you might at the time of the reading not be ready for that information. And then when you have the experience, somebody releases that, or maybe they say the you know, the right phrase, or they kind of jog your own intuition in the right way, and you have that sort of big realization. So perfect. I mean, all of the things there that you said, like, so a nurturing, nourishing sort of woman who happens to be psychic, has a premonition, which is, you know, it's not, it doesn't really come in words, you know. I mean, even people who are what I would say clairaudient, who hear things, they always say to you, it's not like somebody literally whispering in your ear. It's more like a feeling of somebody saying something to you. So there's that whole aspect of it being sort of there, but not there, if that makes any sense. You know, it's kind of coming out of the ethereal, the psychic realm as an impression, as a thought, as a feeling, or in this case, words for you, you know, and it gives you this sort of a really in-depth understanding of something. So absolutely, you see this a lot with the High Priestess. She's always something that has been hidden, something that is ready to come to light. Once you see this card, it's like, expect it or wait for it, because it will show up. It will be something that tends to kind of, you know, you look at it and you say, wow, I didn't know that before.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Huh.
So yeah, that's the other thing that really leads me on to quite nicely. So we've talked about this thing about hiding stuff, about secrets being revealed, or information that we're now ready for. She doesn't share everything. One thing that I say to people, that if, you know, if they're learning and they want to learn, she'll never just give you it straight. Like the magician will say, yeah, sit down, I'll give you everything, right? You know, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to tell you everything. Whereas the High Priestess will watch, she will wait, she will send you thoughts, impressions, dreams, visions. She will impart all of her knowledge with you, but she wants you to be the silent receptacle, just like her. Right.
That's
And
such a Cancer energy.
it's like, yeah,
you figure it out yourself, right? It's like kind of passive aggressive almost. Especially if your Mars is in Cancer, then it's very literally passive aggressive.
Yeah. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Yeah, very much so. I was going to ask you that, actually. I've got some questions here I wanted to ask. So is Cancer considered a secretive sign?
It's withholding a lot of times, because they kind of want you to like figure it out. Like, you should just know that this is how I feel, or whatever. Like they're very indirect. So if you think about a crab, crabs don't just run at you head first. They kind of move side to side, right? And so that Cancerian energy is an energy that tends to approach things like it sidesteps things. It approaches things indirectly, and it'll speak indirectly. So like if you have maybe your Mercury in Cancer, they're not going to be direct with you. They're going to be indirect. And then they want you to just figure, like, you should just figure it out, kind of. And like I said before, that Mars energy is very passive aggressive. Usually people with Mars in Cancer, they're not going to directly tell you that they're angry with you or something like that. They're going to be very passive aggressive. They want you to figure it out and figure out why you're mad, and then, you know, just apologize to you on their own and that type of thing. Like that Cancerian energy expects everyone else to be able to pick up on this like emotional energy and intuitively understand things in the same way that they do. And oftentimes it doesn't work that way.
Very much so.
But there's a withholding there. There is, for sure.
Yeah, I have to say that I'm definitely guilty on that front. Well, especially when I was younger and not so much aware of like astrology or maybe not even so much aware of myself. I was always very intuitive and I could always pick up on things and read situations. But I don't think really until I've matured as a person, let alone, you know, in my years, I think that's when it's really sort of come to light. I think one of the things that I have kind of discovered about Cancerian energy, yes, definitely withholding, but also I think, because and maybe I'm biased here, but I've always said that out of all of the signs, I actually think that lots of people say it's Pisces, but I think Cancer is actually the most psychic of the signs, just through my observations. And I don't know whether that's the link to motherhood and all that stuff that we talked about. But for me personally, that's what I've come to understand. And there is this idea that, well, I can just intuit every situation and what other people's needs are. Why can't you? You're kind of like, oh my God, are you going to kill me? What's going on?
Yeah. And I mean, similar, I have the moon in Cancer, and it's kind of just like, you know, I understand how other people are feeling. They don't have to tell me. I know how you're feeling. Why should I have to tell you how I'm feeling? Like, you should just know and then cater to that, right? Like, a very Cancerian thing. And that Pisces Cancer energy that you were talking about too, like Pisces is very intuitive, very impressionistic, but I would say that Cancer is more accurate in their intuitive capabilities. Pisces can just be like, you don't know if they're picking up on something or if it's just their imagination running wild. Like, they're very good at like making things up and then it feels real to them. And so sometimes there can be, especially, I mean, this depends on everyone's chart. Not every Pisces is doing this, obviously. But
yeah, all of you, Pisces, you're out.
Yeah. There can be kind of like this, like you're just floating out in the ethers and you don't know what's real and what's not. And you're just picking up on all sorts of things. And some of that is just stuff you're imagining. Whereas Cancer, it's a little bit different. It's more like, I feel like it's more real.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've observed as well. So when I see women that are mothers and happen to have like a strong Cancer energy, same even actually for guys, it's not just the maternal sort of paternal instinct that's there. They tend to have that sort of extra intuitive bond with either their partner, their family members, their friends. And that's not to say, because each sign has their their capabilities and their thing. But I've definitely noticed that in people that have a strong emphasis of Cancer energy, they tend to have that, it's almost like they know, like when your mum says, well, I just know. My mum used to do that all the time. She'd be like, I just know. And I see that a lot with Cancerian energy. Like, they do have that sort of that keen inner knowing sense.
It's like an instinctual discernment that Pisces doesn't always have. That's exactly what it is. Like, that helped me articulate it.
Yeah,
it's like an instinctual discernment. And then like Pisces, they can be very psychic, but they don't always know what the hell they're picking up on. Like, it could be anything. Yeah. And that's the issue. There's not the discernment and that instinct to like know what's true and what's not, what's coming from a good source, what's not. They're just picking up on all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a couple more questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So one was, what are the phases of what are the two phases of the moon that most people know are, like the new moon and the full moon? So what is maybe like the best way to use either of those?
The new moon, of course, is the best time to like seed intentions. This is a time where you're not supposed to be doing necessarily. The moon is dark, so there's not a lot of energy around things that you're initiating. And so things will kind of not pan out. Yeah, it's that dark side right there. But it's a good time to sit and meditate and journal and contemplate and figure out it's not like you are actively deciding what you want to create for that month or for that cycle. It's almost like you have to let it come to you and then decide what to do with it a couple days later when you start to see that first little waxing crescent of the moon. A lot of people think new moon, initiate now. It won't turn out the way you think it will. There's so much information that's not revealed that you need in order to actually, yeah, exactly. And then the full moon's like the exact opposite. It's like everything is coming to fruition. You're finally seeing how things are going to be panning out. It's very clear to you what actions you took, what the results of those actions are going to be. It's not necessarily that you're harvesting the results of anything. It's like you're seeing it clearly and you know it's coming to fruition. And, you know, it's kind of that point of no return where you either have to scrap it all or you just let it be because it's just going to happen in this way. And that's a good time for celebration. That's a good time for like external types of activities, for connecting with groups of people. Historically, it would have been a time for socialization because when the moon is full, thinking back to like ancient times when we didn't have artificial lighting, that's when people could go out and have a party and they could stay out later. They could see things. It's safer to be out and about, like out in the woods or whatever, because everything, you can see it. It's lit up. It's like symbolically the same thing. You can see the fruits of your labors. You can see things that were not revealed to you at the time of that new moon. And so you know where things are headed now.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe an unethical tip to give people, but if you want to hide something, new moon. If you want to, you know, if you want something to be seen or not to be seen, then the full moon is obviously the time to look at.
Yeah, and people tend to see things a lot more clearly at the time of the full moon. So it is harder to, yeah, I would say it would be harder to keep secrets. Like things are just out in the open then. That's interesting though. Well, I mean, sometimes you have to keep secrets, you know, maybe it's
absolutely. You know, there's obviously times and places for everything to talk about, for sure. I think that's one of the other things as well with this card. When she shows up, if you, you know, not you personally, anybody watching, if you are sitting on a secret and the High Priestess comes up, your best bet is to get ahead of the curve. If it's something that you have been worrying about, you know, being said or being spoken, and the High Priestess shows up, either cough it up or it's going to be drawn out for you, which is, and you know, sometimes I see this card for various different things, and I'll say to people, you know, now is your moment to speak. You know, when she shows up, she is about something that is going to be revealed, something that's going to be shared, something that is now going to see the light of day. And interestingly enough, we've got that saying, right? There are three things that cannot long stay hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. So I think that's a very High Priestess sort of energy, in like a saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, interesting.
Oh, well, Heather, it's been absolutely amazing. Is there anything else you want to add to that, or anything else you want to segue into?
I feel like we covered like a lot of things, even things that are a little bit more deeper or not quite as well understood about Cancer and the moon, and probably the High Priestess card as well. So I feel like doing this too, it's synergistic. Like you learn more and it helps you to uncover more about astrology, understanding the symbolism in the tarot. And I'm sure, like, you know, vice versa, it's the same.
Absolutely. I love the way that you're able to succinctly kind of get to what I'm babbling about. So that really works. Thank you for that. But yeah, it really is. I'm learning a lot about the astrological side of things.
Sorry, apparently they started doing work on my basement right now.
So yeah, thank you. So again, just for those of you that haven't been over there yet, Heather's channel on YouTube is called Astrology with Heather. Your website is of the same name?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. So please go and check her out. If you want to see the next in this series, you are going to have to go over to Heather's channel, because that's where we will be hosting the next one on the Empress. In the meantime, I know you've got a webinar coming up with Stormy Grace.
I'm actually doing a video with her on her channel, so that'll be probably sometime later this week. And then I have a summer electional guide that I'm working on right now, so people can kind of work on figuring out how to make their plans for the summer and how to time things appropriately so they can be successful whenever they initiate throughout the summer months, because this is kind of an opening that we're coming into. And when I do my electional guide for the fall, it's going to be a little sparse because the astrology gets crazy. So this is like our opportunity phase. And so I want people to be able to take hold of that and to be successful in whatever changes they want to make throughout the summer. So that's the main thing I'm working on right now. And what are you working on?
That's on your website?
Yeah, that's on my website. So go to astrologywithheather.com and you can find that and pre-order it. It'll be available May 9th and I'm excited about it. But yeah, what are you working on? Are you working on anything cool?
Yes, I have a numerology project that is coming, and hoping it's going to be at the end of May. So I love my numerology, as you can tell. And that is, I'm taking it in a slightly different way. It's something that I haven't ever done before. And that will be around the 29th of May, I believe. So okay. If you want to see it, stay tuned. I'm doing the tight lip thing, so you will get it, but the hope is keeping it hidden for now. With that said, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of this project, and I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, thank you. This has been fun.
Awesome. Thank you.